Welcome to Startup Hack. Today we're going to talk about some interesting lessons that a man learned while he was doing security audits for lots of different companies over 7 or 8 years. And I found these pointers really interesting and something that every small business owner should take into account. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Startup Hack. My name is Spencer Tomlinson. I am the CEO and co-founder of CleanRouter as well as many other products. Here are some lessons that I've learned building a successful business while challenging startup norms. My challenge is to push you to rethink startup success. Welcome to Startup Hack. All right, let's go ahead and dig in. So I found this really interesting. I was reading an article about a startup. It says learning from 5 years of tech startup code audits. Now, this is a guy who does security audits against startups' code. So before an investor or somebody can come in and put money into it, he goes and does audits against their code and against their infrastructure to make sure that it's a good buy for the investor, to make sure that they're not getting into something that's going to become a huge security vulnerability. So I thought this was a really interesting perspective then, as he's learned about a lot of different companies that he's seen over 7 or 8 years doing this process. So the very first one of the lessons is you don't need hundreds of engineers to build a great product. And I found that was really interesting because some of the best products I've heard of started with just a few different engineers. And for CleanRouter, we've always just run with a very few engineers. In fact, in the very beginning, it was just Eric and I. We never hired on more. And really, as we got into various different pain points, we would always turn to just one of the two of us writing something to solve the problem. And so, really, this is something that I really firmly believe in. I hear a lot of times people thinking they need hundreds of engineers to build a great thing. I built some pretty amazing things with just a handful of engineers. Even in my corporate world, I rarely think that you need much more than a team of 10 or 11 people. But that's really even on the big side. Currently, at a day job that I'm working at right now, we're able to build some pretty amazing things with four engineers. So I really think that at the end of the day, you don't need hundreds of engineers to build a great product. And in fact, sometimes a lot of it can get lost in the middle of that. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember as you're digging into building your company, as you build the product. Start small and start with just a few engineers to really continue to build, and there's a lot of other things that you can build into it. Number 2, he said, was that simple outperforms smart. And I really like this one because a lot of times people think they have to go really complex, they over-engineer things. I've often told people, let's solve the real problem, not the perceived problem. A lot of times we think there's going to be this problem or this problem or this problem, and we end up building things that just end up never getting used. I even look back at some of the things that we architected in 2009 when we built CleanRouter, and we thought we had to handle every single scenario. Whereas I wish now we had leaned back to allowing some things to have been a little more manual. I'm glad that we solved a lot of the problems with automation because those things are still in place, and I still today don't have to pay somebody to get those things done. But at the same time, there's a few of these scenarios where I'm like, okay, we probably didn't need to account for absolutely every scenario in that situation. Sometimes also, simple can be the best. Right now I'm working on a service, and as we were looking through the service, we found that the service layer was calling out to a third-party service over and over and over again. And we thought, look, 99 out of 100 times, these are going to be exactly the same call over and over and over again. So we built in a caching layer, and now as we're building in that caching layer, it became really simple, and we're pulling it from the database instead of from the other service, and we have a back-end service that updates the caching layer. So, sometimes these simple things that you put into place can make a major difference. So rather than going over and over and over and trying to come up with these other more complex solutions, just by keeping it simple, a lot of times is the easiest way. I know that for CleanRouter, this has been a huge thing. Parents really love the product because for CleanRouter and CleanPhone because it's simple. It's easy to use. And we've really tried to gear towards making these things as simple as possible. So really simple outperforms smart. So I definitely am a big believer in that. The next one is secure software has gotten remarkably easier in the last 10 years. I look back at some of the stuff that we wrote 10 years ago, and I know that now making sure that you're writing stuff that is secure is much, much simpler, and it's become a lot easier to do. And so a lot of it comes to then the next point. So these are kind of 2 points into one, but it said all the really bad security vulnerabilities were obvious. So there's some really obvious things not to do. Don't store your passwords file in a file called password and then make it publicly accessible. Don't work with don't make sure that service endpoints are encrypted and have keys. Make sure that a lot of different things that you're looking at are just obvious. And so be careful with where you're looking at the security. And ultimately, if you're looking at things with a security mindset, it's really not that complicated and it has got a lot harder. And so those are the first four. So the last one is the fifth one is one I would really encourage you, especially for startup businesses. Mono repos are easier to audit. It's not just easier to audit. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're easier to manage, they're easier to track, they're actually easier to work with. I think that is a big piece that I would really strongly encourage. I've now come into multiple different environments where they have had tons and tons and tons of repositories. I think by taking all of your code, storing it in one location, it's very easy to split them up into projects or into solutions if you're using Visual Studio or other different applications, and just break it down into folders and into logical structure, but keep it all in the same repository. It not only makes it easier to audit, it makes it easier for management to manage, it makes it easier for you to track. It makes it a lot simpler for every one of the applications to be able to just make sure that you know the life cycle. Because a lot of times too, if you're in a mono repo, you can say, hey, project A and project B both changed, and that trail becomes a lot easier. Whereas if they're in different repositories, it becomes much harder to see. So definitely would make sure that as you're storing your code, which hopefully you and your business are writing some code, that as you're storing your code, start with the code repository and start with a single one and put all of your code into that repository and build it out with folder structures. You will thank yourself later. I've heard it said that you want to write your code as if a demented psychopath is going to be the one who maintains it. And sometimes that demented psychopath might be you in 5 or 10 years. So make sure that you think of these type of things ahead of time, both with security as well as with storing the mono repo. So to recap, the 5 things that I think are really important for new entrepreneurs and startups to think about is: 1, you don't need hundreds of engineers to build a great product. 2, simple outperform smart. And 3, writing secure software has gotten remarkably easier over the last 10 years. And number 4, all the really bad security vulnerabilities were obvious. And then 5, mono repos are easier to manage and to maintain. So make sure you grab your clean router and your clean phone to keep your kids safe online, especially as you dig into the summer. I know parents are going every which way and chasing kids, and kids are spending more time on the computers. So make sure you have your clean router and your clean phone so that your kids can stay safe online. Thanks, and we'll catch you next time.